Hello, beautiful people. Thank you very much for joining us this evening. I hope this stream will be interesting for one and all. I know it will be for me because I am still on an adventure, a journey of discovery as regards these various themes that we'll be taking a look at this evening. I am very, very pleased to be joined by Prudentialist and Charlemagne. These are two gents with channels of their own. I do believe that I went to some trouble to put together their links. They should be down in the description box below. Please do take time if you are not already subscribed to their channels and, the Substacks in particular, Twitter and the rest. Please do take a moment to go and do that. They're also, having channels of their own and the rest. They are peers and friends as well as guests. So I'm going to invite them to jump in and speak whenever they feel necessary, because we're going to be sort of hashing through this. We've all three been doing some research on our own regarding this topic, which I will properly introduce here in a moment. This stream is going to be kind of like us hashing through what we found out, comparing those things, sharing our impressions about it and the rest. So if you're expecting something that is a polished and final presentation, you are not going to get it here. But if you're the sort of geostrategy autists that dig this sort of thing, then you've come to the right place. Please do follow my channel, Semiagog, as well as a Safer Space. You can do that on YouTube. You can do that on BitChute. Over on Odyssey, there's just the Semiagog channel, but I hope you will follow me there. Follow me on Twitter, Telegram, and the rest. I will have a Substack soon, but it is not yet quite ready. Charlemagne, welcome. You are off in the wild country. Please quickly say hello and shill anything that you would like to.
Hello. Yes, I have my YouTube course, which you should have linked, and then also my Substack. The current paid article I'm working on is based on that book you recommended to me, which is Buildings and Power. It's very interesting, sort of different type of text. I see from your semiotic perspective why you would be interested in the language of buildings and architecture, which is effectively what the book is about. It is a textbook, so it's a bit different than a lot of the type of stuff I read, but yeah, I'm about a third of the way through that, so hopefully in the next week or so I can finish that up and have that out, which should be of interest to people.
Oh, hell yes. And Mr. Prudentialist, very, very happy to have you on. Please shill and say hello and all that good stuff, friend.
Well, hello, everybody. Thank you, Oliver, for having me on. I greatly appreciate it. So if you guys don't know me, I'm the Prudentialist. I cover international relations and culture over on my channel, which Oliver's kindly linked in the description. What I'm currently working on right now are some Substack articles, because my voice, I'm still under the weather, but they're going to be talking about some sort of small town politics, and then also some chapter notes for Murray Friedman's What Went Wrong, the Creation and the Collapse of the Black Jewish Alliance, because we're going to be reviewing that book on with Dimes over on Blood Satellite next month. So by all means, my links are down below in the description, and if you don't know me, well, hello and welcome.
Hot damn. Sorry, I was just getting my windows arranged over here so that I have all the proper chat stuff here so I can keep track of this. Prude, can you just type something into the chat so I can go ahead and give you a wrench too, in case there are any troublesome spotty Herberts that appear?
I sure can. Give me a second.
Not because I think that's going to be an issue, and Charlie's got a wrench. Waves is in the house. Hello, Waves.
I already have a wrench.
Oh, do you? Good. Okay. The more, the merrier. Okay, ladies and gents. So, how best to start this? Guys, what do you think? I was imagining I might just sort of give my take and why I think it's interesting. And then before we get into details in various areas, invite each of you to sort of give your overall picture, if it differs from mine in any significant respect in any spot, bring it up at the outset, and maybe, throw in some points about why you think all of this is interesting. But if that's okay with the two of you, I would just start by, again, throwing out my basic picture and why I think this matters for everyone, and then invite the two of you to do the same. Does that work?
Sounds good.
Let's go for it.
All right. Hot damn. Okay, well, yeah, I have this small problem, which is called having too many damn text edit windows open. Excuse me, brief wardrobe malfunction. Okay, here we go. So the first thing I should say about this is we're going to be talking about a context for what is going on in Ukraine and across regions of Eastern Europe that are basically positioned sort of between the Adriatic, the Baltic, and the Black Sea. And I'll get to what that is in just a moment. But I should say at the outset, if you want to think of all of this as speculation, feel free to. At first, I considered it speculation, but thus far, given that I'm not a believer in coincidences in any sense, certainly as not as regards geopolitics, I'm getting past the point of thinking of it as speculation. I don't doubt for my part that at this point that the general bones of what we're going to look at here are much as I imagine them to be, though, perhaps Charlie and Prude will bring some other angles to it I haven't seen yet. So if you want to think about it as speculation, again, feel free to. I don't want to argue with dill rods and spurgs and randos. If you want to point out things that we've missed, as we doubtless will, none of us, as far as I'm aware, is any kind of an expert on Eastern Europe. We don't speak the primary languages. We haven't spent weeks on this. If you want to point out things that we'll get wrong, as we doubtless will, then I'm absolutely I'm all for it. But I'm not here to convince skeptics. I literally don't care if you're skeptical. I don't care if you think we're flatly wrong or I'm flatly wrong, unless you can make a value neutral defense of your position in relaxed terms. Otherwise, go hump Gonzalo Lira's leg or something. So the subject here is basically this idea. It's a doctrine. It's a strategic doctrine that was set forth in the version I know it as. Perhaps it's older. I'd be open to learning about that. It's a doctrine called Prometheanism, and it was put together by a guy named Piłsudski, who was a sort of Polish war hero and politician and sort of great game player. And this basic idea is that in order to ensure Poland's position going forward, after the formation of the Second Republic, being in a weakened position, they had to find a way to sort of thread the needle of an aggressive Germany on one side with whom they had territorial conflicts, and an aggressive Soviet Union on the other side with whom they had territorial conflicts. So Piłsudski came up with this idea called Prometheanism. And the basic idea is that you go take a look at all of the constituent ethnic groups and potential nations that are under the control of the Soviet Union or, previously the Russian Empire. And you turn them against the Russians. You help them to free themselves. Prometheanism, I imagine, has something to do with the idea of breaking the chains that have, chained Prometheus, specifically in the Caucasus, which is a sort of interesting point. And thereby, Prometheus would be unbound. And of course, Prometheus unbound is an image that we can see with all sorts of progressive literature going back to people like Shelley. There's a long history of it in Europe. Anyway, the idea is that you go into countries like Georgia, or, well, in this context, they're not exactly countries. Let's call them potential countries or ethnic regions with a degree of autonomy that existed under the Russian Empire. And, at the time this doctrine was formulated, were under the control or falling under the control of the Soviets. So you go in and you peel the Georgians off. You go in, you peel off the Belarusians. You peel off the Baltic states. A very, very central plank of this doctrine is the idea that the jewel in the crown, critical to all of this, is peeling off Ukraine. But they also looked at peeling off countries further afield, off in Central Asia. And indeed, the Poles, who were in the midst of all of this cunning secret squirrelery, supported in many respects by Western countries, were also supported by parties in the Far East, working with the Japanese, for example, to agitate for rebellion with the 1905 revolution in Russia. That becomes interesting when we start looking at things now about, Poland entering into military cooperation with other Far Eastern entities today to buy tanks, for example, from the South Koreans. So that's the basic idea. The main angle with Prometheanism, Piłsudski's basic ideas, is that not only are you peeling these countries off, which means you're moving them out of the column of assets that Russia has recourse to, you're literally moving them over into the red column. You're making them a major problem for Russia because you're turning them against the Russians, and you wind them up, you arm them, you agitate them, you inflame their nationalism, and then you basically make use of the leverage you've thereby created to direct them against the Russians. So there are other angles about this, reinterpretations of this basic doctrine, because it's not current today as the old ideas of intermarium, which, is this idea of being between seas, which is a name for a regional bloc that, depending on the version of it you hear, maybe it does or doesn't include the Black Sea or the Adriatic, but, it's intermarium. Then there's three seas as a more modern version. The idea of the Piłsudski Prometheanism seems to have been reinterpreted. Now it seems to go under the name of the Giedroyc doctrine, and that was put together by one Jerzy Giedroyc. I can't pronounce Polish, so yeah, lol. And these folks, these Polish expatriates, went over to France, and they had a magazine called Kultura, in which they popularized these ideas. But Giedroyc was actually an old comrade of Piłsudski's. And then this idea, so we're given to understand, was carried all the way over to the United States, and Polish emigres popularized it, and it began to be picked up by, so we might imagine, intelligence agencies, the State Department, and the rest, though the evidence for all that is a bit confusing, because there's been some stuff written about it that suggests that, they didn't get a willing ear, but yeah, everything that I see happening now suggests quite the contrary, that they found a very willing ear. So that's the basic idea. Again, why does it matter? Why should we even care about discussing such things? I think the first point is that nobody's talking about Ukraine in this context at all. And one of the things that you see clearly when you explore Prometheanism is that it's very much about peeling Ukraine off. That's central, off of Russia. That's central to everything. And I believe without this context, it's impossible to get a sense of what's actually happening in its historical framework, right? Or at least in its likely historical framework. Consider this speculation as you like. Another thing is that, as best I understand it, World War II in Europe started because of similar elements being in play. And we see similar players like Germany and Russia agreeing to crush this second Polish Republic. So, should we perhaps look at this as though the stakes might be a bit higher than we're generally told in the West? Again, it seems Prometheanism has been picked up in some fashion by the United States, although, again, the more recent name is Giedroyc doctrine. And then I think it's also interesting to look at, because this all occurred to me when I was thinking about the Three Seas Initiative and how it just seemed to be perfectly designed to cut Russia off from three seas. And as I mentioned yesterday in another stream, I posted a thing on Twitter where I said, this is, to me, it looks like the Three Seas initiative is just a way to block Russia's access to Three Seas. Change my mind. And somebody, I wish I could remember who, answered pretty quickly and said, yeah, Prometheanism. And I was like, what? Wait, now I got to go look at this. Indeed, that is the case. And so I started to poke at all of this. But the sense that was very interesting to me was that here we have evidence of the fact that the GA, because I don't call it the gay, I call it the global Anglo-American empire. Both of them are to blame. But in any case, the GA is perfectly happy to run nationalist regimes when it suits them. As you know, so I'll argue here, it's currently doing in Eastern Europe. So we should remember that. We should very much remember that when it suits them, they're perfectly happy to unleash nationalism. And we'll get into details about that. So I saw this. I started to poke at it. I saw a few things. I was almost immediately talking with Charlemagne and Prudentialist about this. Both of them started digging into it immediately. And I was like, guys, does this seem crazy? And they're like, no, this might have legs. So they've been kind of in on it from the beginning. Doing quite a bit of research on their own. So I'll turn it over to you guys, whichever of you wants to go first. What are your thoughts on this? How do you frame the basic picture, and why do you think it matters?
All right. That was quite an introduction. I would like to give a fairly extensive one myself, really, before we even get into the main topic, because there's a lot of really important background to understand here, and I would actually characterize the stream more as a stream about Poland rather than the Ukraine conflict. That's almost a side note to this whole concept. So where do we start? Let's start with Poland itself. Depending on what you know about Poland, you may know about the Polish-Lithuanian Commonwealth, which was sort of this Eastern European imperial state that existed as a competitor with Russia primarily. Many hundreds of years ago. It was long since gobbled up by Russia and Prussia, I believe, basically partitioned the Polish-Lithuanian Commonwealth out of existence. And then the country of Poland didn't exist for many hundreds of years. The country of Poland didn't exist for many hundreds of years until the end of World War I, when it was just put back in place. And the thing about Eastern Europe, if you look at Eastern Europe in any given point in history, there's often sort of a country that just doesn't exist, like Poland, for example. There's kind of not enough room in Eastern Europe for four great powers. If you think of the United Germany, which is effectively a Prussian state, the Austro-Hungarian Empire, or the Russian Empire, and the Polish-Lithuanian Commonwealth, all four of those powers basically cannot exist at the same time. So there's sort of this eternal conflict over all of these completely legitimate nations trying to exist in this space that they can't really share effectively. You can kind of see here how large state, there's just sort of not enough. Poland has gotten the short end of the stick a lot in the 20th century in terms of being conquered. But it came back into existence, right? So Poland, as you talked about in your stream with Millennial Woes, came back into existence after World War I. And it, filled in this territory that effectively was Prussia, right? So Poland was gifted a lot of German territory. Now, after World War II, Poland was resurrected with, I believe, the exact same borders, which effectively eliminated the German state. It might be a bit of an exaggeration, but I think rump state is a somewhat fair characterization of the modern Germany. If you look at Germany right there, you can see the parts of it that used to be Prussia, and some of which were East Germany that are now just part of Poland, right? So modern Poland has defeated Germany, not even through its own actions, but through being conquered by Germany and the Soviet Union, and then simply being resurrected by the Anglo-Americans and the French, basically. So from Poland's perspective, Germany is a defeated foe. Germany is a tiny state that has had its core territory, like its Germany's core cultural territory of Prussia that really defined the unified German state in terms of its culture was just given to Poland. And then, of course, during the entire Cold War, the real Germany was basically East Germany, right? East Germany actually preserved what you would call the real German culture, whereas West Germany was totally cucked. And then after the Cold War ended, East Germany was merged into West Germany and basically ceased to exist. So
I'm just going to throw in, I'm not entirely sure that certainly West Germany got cucked, but I'm not sure that East Germany preserved its core culture. I don't want to get into a side thing with you about it. I'm just going to throw that in there so I don't catch hell about that characterization. And I'll also point out that Kaliningrad, also formerly German Prussian, got seized by the Soviets. So the Russians still have part of that. But sorry, go on, Charlie.
Yeah, fair enough. But the point is, Germany doesn't exist anymore, basically. So Poland has conquered Germany. So where are they going to look? They're going to look east towards Russia, which is their other foe that is historically the greater problem in terms of Polish sovereignty. Germany, didn't even exist for most of Poland's history. So it's not really the primary state that Poland is concerned with, even though people like to meme about that. I mean, Germany is just utterly defeated, and it's been conquered by Poland, effectively. Another thing we should say about Poland is not this warm, fuzzy state. Pilsudski, I think it would be fair to characterize him as a military governor of Poland following World War I. Poland is basically a militaristic state, necessarily, because of the foes that have surrounded it for a good part of the 20th century. It's in a very fragile position, as World War II showed, where its very existence is basically contingent on these Western, Anglo-American, and French powers making sure it was there. They're the entire reason that Poland actually exists as an independent country. So it's important to think about Poland with regard to the fact that it only recently returned to existence, and its return involved at least 2 world wars. Plus, it was then controlled by the Soviet Union, of course. Although the country technically existed for most of the 20th century, Poland effectively did not exist. Only after the fall of the Soviet Union and Poland, and along with the other satellite states, became independent in 91, I think.
And Poland was, if I recall, the first of them to really break itself away, right? The solidarity. Poland
break away, let go. I would say Russia more let it go than it broke away. You could say both, but we don't really need to discuss that exactly. But yeah, it's only really been sovereign for a short period of time, and its sovereignty is still, of course, somewhat dependent on the Western powers helping to maintain its actual military security. So that's sort of the state Poland is in, and some of the background in regards to its historical existence, which is important to understand because we want to understand the Polish perspective for what is around it and what its geopolitical goals are. Its geopolitical goals certainly have nothing to do with Germany at this point in terms of keeping Germany off its back, because Germany is totally and utterly crushed at this point. Poland has no reason to concern itself with Germany. Poland is looking like it's going to supplant Germany in terms of being the major Central European power. So their concerns are directed entirely east. Russia, from Poland's perspective, is its main competitor and existential threat in terms of maintaining its actual sovereignty right now. So that is the Polish perspective and some of the historical backdrop and sort of why this region is always going to be sort of a conflict zone. Like, there's kind of no way for everyone to get their way in Eastern Europe because the way the space is divided and the way it's changed hands over the centuries, these 4 powers, Germany, the Austro-Hungarian Empire, which definitely doesn't exist anymore, Poland, and the Russian Empire all sort of have very competing claims over what belongs to whom in this area of the world. So that's my intro. I'll hand it off to Prude.
Really quickly before you start, Prude, I just want to say that we should remember that the Poles hate the Germans too. And though
They do, of
Charlemagne
course.
is Charlemagne is quite right that they have nothing military to fear from Germany right now. They certainly are willing to demonize them at the same time, or attempt to guilt them into giving them money and all sorts of other things, because we've seen quite a bit of that going on. As we get into some of the news articles and stuff, we'll see that they're pushing in that direction. So yeah, Poles are equal opportunity employers in terms of hating Germans and Russians. Sorry, Prude.
So I'm going to begin this introduction with a few things to just sort of block out at the beginning. With any discussion when it comes to, say, the war that's currently happening, or talking about the American government putting pressure alongside her allies to get what they want out of a certain country, or to enact a certain policy to achieve a geopolitical goal, this doesn't mean that we're going to simply say X country has no agency or X government doesn't have any agency at all. But we do recognize the fact that larger powers are going to have a significantly larger degree of sway on smaller ones, especially when the stakes are as high as they are between the issues of NATO, the Three Seas Initiative, Intermarium, and what the American government would like to do to the Russian Federation. I'm going to be looking at this a little differently than my two cohorts up here, because I want to view this from the lens of what the American government would be doing, and the lens of the conflict, and taking advantage of long-standing historical narratives and cultural implications that exist for the region. The first thing that I feel is important for us to introduce is sort of the existing lens and viewpoint that the American government might be viewing the regards to Russia and its foreign policy of today. Most of it, I think, and still resides today in the lens of the 20th and the 19th centuries, particularly along the works of Nicholas J. Speakman and Sir Malford Mackinder. Primarily,
Prude,
go ahead.
Very sorry to cut in. You might need to move your mic back. I'm getting some comments about it being loud. Sorry.
How about now?
We'll see if anybody howls. But again, apologies for the interruption.
Oh, no worries. So the other thing to keep in mind between those two thinkers is, I think the important focus to me is going to be on Speakman. And his idea is that primarily Eurasia, which consists of Russia, the Caucasus, and parts of where we would see the former Soviet Stan republics, Kazakhstan, Uzbekistan, and the rest, compromises what's known as the heartland, or the central zone. Surrounding that area, places like where the Adriatic and the Baltic and the Black Seas would meet, Scandinavia, the outer parts of India, China, and the Middle Eastern Saudi Arabian Peninsula are considered to be the rimland, or the inner ring, with the rest of the world being exterior islands and continents, and North and South America as the New World. Now, Speakman has a pretty general concept of this idea when it comes to looking at how the world operates, and he believes that whoever can control the rimland rules Eurasia, and who rules Eurasia controls the destinies of the world, not just on the basis of, access to mineral resources or wealth, but that controlling littoral European aspects of resources, countries, and governments would be essential to maintain the balance of power, and effectively maintain that balance of power in the American Anglo favor for the world. Now, considering that the Intermarium concept, which really emerges out of Poland primarily in the 1920s, according to a great paper here by Andrea Schmidt out of the University of Pest in Hungary, had wrote that this concept was that these countries that were located to the south of Polish political borders were true. However, Poland strived to present itself with the Intermarium project as the most reliable defender of Slavic patriotism. And I think, given the recent increase of support for either Intermarium or Three Seas Initiative, both out of Ukrainian talking heads, as well as Zelensky's support for how the Polish government has responded in recent months since the war had began, not to mention just a month ago, we almost had decided to tweet ourselves into World War III with missiles of origins that have yet to be officially claimed, other than to be Ukrainian, landing in Polish territory. Now, with all this being said, the Intermarium and Three Seas Initiative especially the Three Seas Initiative, has a rather strong American influence that backs it. And this is primarily because the former president of Croatia from 2015 to 2020, Kolinda Grabar-Kitarovic, which I apologize if I mispronounced that, but we're just going to go with Kolinda as her first name. She was the first woman to win the presidency. She was also the youngest at age 46. to be the president of Croatia. She was a big part of leading the Three Seas Initiative, and she has a long lifetime of working with the American government. She was educated here. She was born in Rijeka, Croatia. She went to Los Alamos in New Mexico, graduated high school there. She did go back to study at the University of Zagreb, but her long history is close with the United States as a Fulbright scholar, Harvard University, the Kennedy School, as well as Johns Hopkins University. She's been a big supporter of NATO expansion and signing the NATO accession protocols in the White House alongside Albania in 2008, which is coincidentally an important time during the conference that would inevitably lead and be a motivating factor for the Russian invasion of South Ossetia and dealing with Georgia. She was invited to join the Trilateral Commission, which was led by none other than Mr. Brzezinski himself of the National Security Council here in the United States under the Carter administration. So I think it's important for us to understand that if I'm the American government and my goal is to weaken or destabilize the Russians, and I have a long theory of history of international relations, especially under Nicholas Speakman, then I, for one, have a pretty guaranteed understanding that I have to control these littoral territories, which means having significant influence on Poland, Hungary, Ukraine, and ensuring that my NATO organization can continue to expand to those areas like Lithuania and so on. So, to me, looking at this sort of concept, this historical one, has been an avenue for which the American government has been able to angle itself in for its own geopolitical interests, not just within the war, but also its ongoing power rivalry between the United States and Russia.
Cool. Okay. So how would you guys say, and maybe this is a question for Charlemagne. I know intermarium is an old concept of Piłsudski's. Maybe it's an earlier one. This is a map that we're seeing here that shows intermarium. Let's see if we can get a map of the Three Seas Initiative. While I'm doing that, what's the difference between the various political intermarium ideas of Piłsudski and Poland and this other thing called the Three Seas Initiative? What is the Three Seas Initiative?
Yeah, let me take that. So these are related concepts. Intermarium is sort of the formal Polish concept of how you would more or less go about resurrecting something that looks like the Polish-Lithuanian Commonwealth in terms of the security guarantees it would provide for Poland. I mean, basically, the idea here is that Poland is sort of the key power player in Eastern Europe among the Slavs that sort of unites the Slavic states in a confederation to protect all of them mutually from Russia, because the recognition is that none of these states are powerful enough to protect themselves from any military threats from the West or the East. Therefore, you need some sort of bloc united in at least a confederation in order to protect their geopolitical interests. Now, the Three Seas Initiative, I think, is it's an idea that inherits from this concept. It has the same DNA. It's not the same thing, though. As we
Inherit
can see here,
specifically from the intermarium, because this is the Three Seas Initiative map, if I've got this up correctly, and this is the intermarium map. So you can kind of see that it's the same basic idea, right? I mean, that's what you're getting at here, no?
Yes, and obviously the Ukraine would be in the Three Seas Initiative if it was NATO aligned at the moment, right? I mean, so we can say that as well. So it's very close to the same map. The difference
sorry, Charlie. I just want to get this in here. You see also there how in this map for the Three Seas Initiative, you see how former Yugoslav states are not in there because they haven't all officially come in, right? But over here under the intermarium map, they were considered part of that program, as we'll see in the case of stuff that will doubtless come up about Serbia and Montenegro specifically. But so I'm just saying your point about Ukraine, if they could have put it in the damn program at this point, they would have. Likewise, I think if they could have put former Yugoslav territories in there, they would have as well. But go on. Sorry.
Did you have anything to add in, Prude?
Oh, I was going to add that in 1980, when Brzezinski was still holding his role at the National Security Council, he did float the idea of bringing back a Polish-Hungarian sort of alliance or confederation in order to sort of strengthen their political position against the Soviet Union in the future. And this idea was quickly shot down by then Yugoslavic's government in that regard. And since then, right, with the collapse of Yugoslavia and the emergence of new states has made that exceptionally difficult. The Three Seas Initiative also, though, is more heavily focused on energy and infrastructure projects. For instance,
Yeah,
one of
it's
the
more
things,
economic, right?
Yeah.
Rather than strictly diplomatic. Not that the diplomatic dimension isn't there, but it's an economic initiative, infrastructure, energy, right?
Oh yeah, I mean, one of the biggest things that they're currently working on is something called Via Carpathia, and it's this planned transnational highway network planning to connect, Klaipeda and Lithuania all the way down to Thessaloniki in Greece, which will help connect pipelines and LNG transportation as well. That's all I
And
know.
do we know
Oh.
what the difference is between the Three Seas Initiative and, say, something like the Visegrad Group? Because that's another economic cooperation bloc that includes some of these states. I mean, if I remember correctly, I think Visegrad is what, Poland, Hungary, is it Czech Republic? I can't remember. Let me look
It's
here.
4 that are adjacent to Poland, or 3 that are adjacent to Poland. And there's not many
Right,
options
I'm
there.
trying to remember specifically which they are. Yeah, I should know. Okay, so do we know yet whether or not the Visegrad Group, which is presumably these 4 that we see?
Oh no, I guess one isn't. It's so that's Hungary and
If this thing will come up on the screen, I'm so damn slow, or maybe I've just gone to the world.
Hungary, Poland, and
right. That's Poland, Hungary, Czech Republic, and Slovakia, right?
yeah.
Okay, so we can see that that's okay. Let's just go ahead and set that to one side because it seems to distinctly be lacking the aspect of connecting those 3 C's, and I still stand by the notion that that this is really about blocking Russia's access to 3 C's as much as it is establishing this non-Russian Slavic bloc. It's another thing that we have to underscore here is that this is a way to bring all the Slavs together, but also to tell the Russians to fuck off. And they are historically the ones who are the major power that used their shared cultural and linguistic characteristics. Not that these are all one language; they're all different and culturally different ethnoses, or ethnicities. But nevertheless, it's a way of basically bringing together all the Slavs, and doing so while telling Russia that they can feel free to take a flying fuck at a rolling donut. There's another point which should be brought up here, which is that the business of the what do you call it? Prometheanism, that specifically targeted even more countries than ones that might be under consideration here. Georgia is a major one that we have to bring into the consideration set that is still very much in play, that's a part of this same picture, but does not fall within the domain of either the 3 C's initiative or intermarium as previously imagined. But sorry, guys, do you have further things you want to throw in?
Yeah, let's go back to the 3 C's versus intermarium thing, because there's still a lot of explaining to do here on what these things even are. So 3 C's initiative, what are we looking at? The 3 C's are the Black Sea, the Adriatic Sea, which is connected in this initiative just through the Balkans right there, and then of course the Baltic Sea. So these are the 3 C's it's talking about, which are the seas that all the countries are touching, basically. The intent is to connect these into one large economic group, basically. So you asked 3 C's initiative versus intermarium. 3 C's initiative is sort of a more economic version of intermarium, where there's no federation or shared government, but these countries are going to be economically tied together, which, as we know, is basically how the U.S. likes to do geopolitics, is through economic tying. And the difference here too is that this group is way larger than the intermarium is, and includes countries that
that are not. I have to add in because I got entirely justly slapped by Professor Pohl here. He's absolutely right, and it's just a stupid oversight on my part not to mention what I do know which is that these other groups like Hungarians and what do you say, Lithuanians, Latvians, Estonians, Hungarians, and Romanians are not Slavs. He's absolutely correct. And insofar as I presented it as though all those countries were, I'm wrong. And thank you, Dr. Pohl. Go on, Maine.
Yeah, that's fair. And in terms of Slavs, I mean, if you look at the more southerly Slavs, the Poles aren't really a fan of them. And I mean, Romania is not a country that Poland really respects, and especially these countries further south into the Balkans. I mean, like Bulgaria is on there, right? Like these aren't the same thing as the states you would expect to see in like a proper Polish-Lithuanian Commonwealth. So this is sort of, and again, yeah, we have the Baltics here. This is sort of tying together a bunch of different states that aren't really friends. I mean, not to say that not even to say that Poland is friends with its other neighbors, right? But this is sort of a weird grouping of countries. And if you look from my research on 3C's initiative, it's very U.S. friendly. It's U.S. backed. They really like the United States. They want the United States involved in this project heavily. The 3C's initiative is the U.S. version of Intermarium, basically. And yeah, you can see there's the Polish-Lithuanian Commonwealth. What's not in there is Romania and these Baltic states, right? Like that's just not part of Poland's historical geographic makeup.
Sorry. The Baltic states are very much in there. Or adjacent to it and a part of that domain. You mean it's not the littoral states with the Adriatic and the Black Sea and Romania and the Balkans? Balkans, not Baltics, right?
I mean,
you may have cut out. So sorry if I sound like a bitch. Go on.
Poland basic, like the Lithuanian part is kind of. It's really just a big Polish empire, effectively. But anyway, yeah, you can see it here. It does not include all these countries west and south of it that are being stuck in there. The 3C's initiative, which exists more as a U.S. project to economically tie all these things together. So I view the 3C's initiative as sort of a larger economic version of Intermarium that is very U.S. friendly. They want the U.S. to integrate with them economically. The U.S. does support them. The U.S. has some investment in the 3C's initiative, which is effectively sort of a investment fund at this point. And they sort of throw a bone to Germany. If you look at the literature, like it doesn't include Germany, but we're going to involve you because Germany basically needs to be placated, right? Germany is a cucked rump state effectively, but Germany still has to be placated because Germany could sort of activate if it wanted to, and obviously Poland doesn't want that.
And it's still massive economic power, or
yes.
Well, up until recently.
And it could be again if it wanted to. So they need to throw Germany a bone. So 3C's initiative is doing that. And yeah, like I said, it's a U.S. backed project heavily. And Prudentialist mentioned some of the things they're investing in. So they're like investment, energy, transportation, and then like digital infrastructure or something. I can't remember the exact phrasing.
That's kind of a digital infrastructure, energy, and transportation are all fundamentally military.
Yes, that's what I was going to say.
Now,
these are military.
In Ukraine.
These are military economic investments. We're talking about rails and energy, which is sort of the main driver behind military conflict, especially in this region of the world. Is where's the energy coming from? Who controls it? So this is a military alliance basically that's sort of framed as economic development for developing poorer countries that sort of came from the Eastern Bloc. But this is a military alliance the U.S. is trying to sort of force into existence by tying all their infrastructure together and making them all interdependent on each other. It's almost like a mini EU that's being set up here. So yeah, you had asked me about Intermarium versus 3C's initiative. I don't have anything else to say there. Where do we want to go from now?
Well, I'd like to add on the 3C's initiative just to cut in here. So I mentioned the one of the two politicians that had signed on for this project, which of course was the Croatian president, Kolinda Grabar Kitorovic. The other one, of course, is the Polish president, Duda. The other thing to keep in mind is that in 2020, in August, they had put out a report on the Three Seas initiative. This comes from the Polish Economic Institute, the Polish Institute of Economics, PIE. And they were talking about what their partnerships would look like for the future, for external partnerships for trade and, excuse me, and who their major trading partners and economic investors would be in. And the three that they list are the United States, China, and Japan. This doesn't explicitly mention at all anywhere in the document in regards to Russia as a potential partner at all. They are more open for connectivity to the access to sort of the Asiatic markets and are more interested about getting access to foreign direct investment in that regards as well. And that they are excited about the idea of getting increased access to Chinese investment in capital markets, particularly because they've been incredibly happy with the GDP growth and their power purchasing parity in regards to other countries in the area. And they think that the Three Seas initiative is to do so. And since we've mentioned all of this infrastructure projects, all the things that they wish to invest in, they're specifically focused on the economic relationships with virtually anyone but their next door neighbor, which happens to be the Russian Federation. And this is done very much on purpose. This is to exclude them, to cut them out. Isolation has been the principal goal of a lot of American foreign policy when dealing with what they consider to be hostile states or regimes. Since 1978, the United States has maintained, for instance, some kind of international sanctions campaign against the Islamic Republic of Iran, which has forced its allies, right, to jump through the hoops. For instance, like France has to go through some extenuating circumstances to maintain a rather healthy manufacturing and airline industry with the Iranians. But it does come at risk, of course, of trying to bypass and not trigger American sanctions. And so these are the kinds of things that I think are important for us to keep in mind, is that a lot of these policies that are meant to act as a bolstering initiative that are backed by the American government, whether it's, regardless of either administration. I mean, there have been meetings of the Visegrad group, for example, as well as the Three Seas initiative that have had both Trump officials as well as Biden officials as well visiting and participating in these meetings. And so this is very much a sort of, for lack of a better term, this is sort of just a uniparty, this is a foreign policy interest that the United States wants to maintain regardless of who's wearing the red hat or the blue hat in the White House.
Roger that. I'll also throw in that I heard back in the day that the Poles had long, even during the period when they were dominated by the Soviet Union, they had long economic ties with China. Apparently, the Chinese bought a lot of Polish pork. And so it would seem natural for the Poles to continue to develop those relationships that they had with China over many, many years. Sorry, before I go on, Charlemagne, did you want to say something?
That's interesting. I didn't know that bit. I wanted to comment on that. It was interesting that you expounded on the Japanese part of this, because I had noticed that the last Three Seas Initiative yearly event that happens, there was a Japanese banker that was one of the speakers, and I thought, that's kind of weird. What's this guy from Japan doing, with this economic bloc? I mean, not that global trade doesn't exist, but it's interesting out of a select number of keynote speakers that a banker from Japan was there.
Well, until you look at the bigger map and you see, of course, that the Polish relationship with Japan started at the end of the 19th century, 1890s. Actually, I pulled up something about this. Where is it? We'll get to some of these other articles.
Also, while you look, who's on the other side of Russia who also has a historical beef and interest in weakening Russia?
Yeah,
of
Japan.
Course. It's Japan. So
That's
they're sort of a
the whole
natural
point.
ally here.
That's why you go look. I found, a Japanese novelist, Tokai Sanshi, wrote about the partitions of Poland and the Polish independence movement. The Japanese poem Porando Kaiho by Ochiai Naobumi about Fukushima Yasumasa traveling in the 1890s mentions the Polish struggle for freedom. Fukushima established contacts with members of the Polish resistance movement and exiles to Siberia in order to obtain detailed information about the common enemy, as you're pointing out, Charlemagne, of the Poles and the Japanese, Russia. And this goes on much further. There was cooperation between the Japanese and the Poles. Remember that the Japanese, there's this thing called the Russo-Japanese War or whatever, Russo, I don't know. Anyway, the Japanese rather slapped the shit out of the Russians in the Far East in 1905, right about the time that they cooperated with Poles and other groups, pouring lots of money into it in order to cause revolutions to erupt in Russia in 1905. So, yeah, there's a reason why parties on both ends of Russia are joining together in order to make these things happen. And I would argue that this is likely why you're seeing Japanese people speaking at things about the Three Seas Initiative. Now, Intermarium, as we can see in the map here, is set up to cut off Russia from Europe entirely. I mean, especially if they can peel off Ukraine. And again, you guys, I'm sure, have seen it too. Piłsudski's ideas absolutely centered on this idea of Prometheanism, centered on this idea of peeling Ukraine away as this critical aspect, because that's the core sort of secondary element of the Polish-Lithuanian Commonwealth at its largest extent, and it gives them access to that other sea, but again, cuts Russia off. Now, if we take a look at the Three Seas Initiative, Croatia is very important here. Croatia just oddly was, given this huge section of Dalmatian coast. If you ever, zoom in on these maps, you'll see that down here, Bosnia-Herzegovina was given some tiny little bullshit snippet of Adriatic access right around here. Serbia is right in this block, and they're getting a brisk fucking from the West right now. They've been completely surrounded. Part of their territory has been partitioned and peeled away in Kosovo, and the U.S. stuck a big old military base there. And now, and we'll look at this in a bit, Montenegro has been peeled off. They used to be much more close with Serbia. Serbia and Montenegro, as I understand it, used to be the two former Yugoslav countries that had a really close relationship and saw themselves at least as cousins, more or less. Although the Serbs were always making jokes about the Montenegrins being tall and lazy. But the point here, if you look at this map, you can see, well, there's Kaliningrad and the Suwalki Gap, and you'll notice we've heard a bunch of shit going on there recently. But otherwise, Russia's cut off. This one area with Kaliningrad is their strong point, and this corridor is considered a area that will at one point be hotly contested strategically and tactically. So we're seeing flashpoints around this, but especially if Kaliningrad gets cut, and we consider the addition of now Finland and what is it, Sweden to NATO. Basically, that'll give Russia this one little port on the Baltic if Kaliningrad were to get cut off, and this is not a port that they can use year round. And they'd have to traverse all this space. Basically, they'd be bottled up in here in the north if this kind of arrangement were allowed to become a bloc with military power, economic power, and able to assert itself more. Down here, remember, they're just now trying to bring Ukraine online. And Russia had to reassert itself here at Crimea, which is, of course, the base for the Russian Black Sea Fleet. And people hopefully know something the fuck about history, and they will recognize that there was a war here in the middle of the 19th century called the Crimean War, and it was one of the first big amphibious operations historically. It's the first time that the French and the English fought together with the Turks against the Russians. It brought the Caucasus into play. This was the whole time period when the Caucasians were, get hot smoke blown up their asses about how they were going to get helped by the West. Turkey said they were going to help the mountaineers and the Circassians. The Brits said they were going to help them. And in the end, they left them to get fucked and forgot about them after the war was settled. But anyway, we once again saw the West try to peel via their attempted takeover of Ukraine. They were going to peel basically all of this Black Sea littoral off from Russia. So I think there's a good moment here where we can turn to a little bit more background that we should, to be proper here, cover. The first is that this is a sequence of events. And it probably goes back further than this, but for the time being, well, in many respects, it certainly does. But for the time being, let's just look at Georgia, right? Georgia was a country that was explicitly identified by Piłsudski as one of the countries that should be peeled away from Russia, because everybody understands the importance of the Transcaucasian Highway, the old Georgian military highway, basically the gate in the southern wall of Russia. And South Ossetia sits right on top of that. Georgia had a lot of money getting dumped into it by George Soros at that time, around 2008, because I lived in Turkey at the time, and I was talking to a rich Turkish family that was getting Soros investment in its pharmacy chain, and was talking to me about how tons of Soros money was pouring into Turkey and into Georgia. And so they attempted to push Georgia to become more independent from Russia, and to reassert itself in terms of get a lot more belligerent with stuff like South Ossetia, and Georgia had been trying to pull Abkhazia away, which it claimed as its own. Russia ironically backed the Abkhazians. A deeply ironic fact historically. Anyway, that was 2008, and other than the real thing that brought Vladimir Putin out in the first place, like, people don't remember this because we're going to have to get over to the idea of, let me pull up this damn map, right? So this will make sense to people who don't know maps. I can see them in my head, but maybe other people can't.
As you bring up the maps, I mean, Russia's the largest country in the world, right? But how many ways are there out of Russia that are actually economically viable? There are not many of them.
Yeah, especially warm water ports.
Yeah, exactly. Like, Russia's practically landlocked because the Arctic Ocean for now is useless, basically. The ports in the north are not year-round. The Black Sea is absolutely critical, and there's just the one port, really, in Sevastopol. And then, of course, Odessa during various parts of Russia's existence. And then, of course, you have Port... it was called Port Arthur at some point, I believe, way off in the east, but that's on the opposite side of the planet, basically, right?
Yeah, so, and the same island chains that contain China effectively contain, or to at least partially serve to also contain Russians in the Pacific. Now, I will add in, though, however, that the Russians are putting together large fleets of icebreakers, even one that's an enormous nuclear-powered one. And they have several that are nuclear powered. So I think Russia is planning for issues along these lines, and does have contingencies, but it does need these ports.
Yeah, I was about to add to that. They are currently the fastest and growing investor in nuclear powered icebreakers compared to the rest of the Arctic Council countries. In fact, the United States is behind in its production of nuclear-powered icebreakers. Both the Russians, the Americans, and other Arctic Council countries do believe that as the effects of climate change, whatever you want to call it, proceed, that the Arctic Ocean and the northern polar region is going to be an avenue potential for not just economic exploration in order to get routes in towards trade, but also for military investitures as well. And so the United States has actually got a few icebreakers that on loan from Canada and other countries, but Russia's ahead there. Now that you've got the map, you can see Lithuania and Poland right there. There's that Suwalki Gap that Oliver and I have talked about on my show once before, and the impact that Kaliningrad really is. It is one of the most fortified pieces of territory in this part of the continent. And there's in
the world.
I don't know the direct number, but there are reported, nuclear weapons there as well. Not to mention, this is a huge part for any way that the Russian Navy wants to get out of the Baltics and to commit and practice naval exercises in the area. Not to mention that it's kind of convenient, dare I say, that the Nord Stream 2 pipeline destruction and sabotage had taken place not too far, considering this is an area in which both the Americans, NATO allies, as well as the Russian Navy tends to patrol, although that happened much further closer to Germany than it did up here, probably for the reason to avoid detection.
Swedish economic zone, not Swedish territorial waters, but Swedish economic zone. Yeah,
but an area
let me just
where there's been a lot of
quick,
naval
just because Kaliningrad is a good demonstration of how messed up this area of the world is. I believe Kaliningrad is part of former Prussian territory.
Yeah, it was Prussian.
Yeah, so that kind of goes to show you how contested this part of the world is. It belonged to Prussia. It's effectively Polish territory at the moment that's under Russian control. But it's under threat by Poland constantly, basically.
Right. Now, what I wanted to just show is that, remember, 3 Seas has to do with getting to the Adriatic as well. And Serbia has been locked in, right? The EU has told them they can basically suck a fart, and all kinds of things are going on in Montenegro, right? Croatia has this area of the coastline you see down here by Split. And then you could see this tiny, pathetic little area that has been turned over to Bosnia-Herzegovina. And then the rest of this was given to Croatia as well. Basically, they've gone to great pains to ensure that this probably got given to, I don't know the details of whatever settlement that gave Bosnia-Herzegovina access, but I'm sure they only confirmed it and signed on the dotted line once they ensured that the EU was relatively firmly in control of Bosnia-Herzegovina. Serbia, on the other hand, is fucked, and it used to get along with Montenegro to be able to get to the sea. But now Montenegro, as I should probably jump and go look at, has been peeled off, and they're trying to put it firmly under control of the EU PAS people. And I want to remind folks, I mentioned Soros earlier, going into Georgia. We know that Soros was all over the Maidan stuff in Ukraine. Well, let's look at what's his name? What's the little wiener's name? Is it Alexander Soros? Yeah. Editorial, New York Times, Balkans, right? Because the Balkans is a part of the 3 Seas initiative. Okay, here we go. New York Times opinion in the Balkans, a chance to stabilize Europe. This is from 2018. And George and his son just, put this opinion piece together and talked about how the EU has really got to come together to bring the Balkans in. And this is a big opportunity, and we need to do it to make sure that NATO's there and everything else. I just want to remind you folks that it's all part of this original concept. And further, it's all part of fucking Serbia. So we know that Serbia is surrounded, right?
Yes, and remember, this is a war. Serbia and the war is conducted economically, primarily. And Serbia is now totally isolated. So it's effectively taken out of the game.
Or they're trying to. And that point that Charlie made, I should have made much earlier. Everybody has to understand that what we're seeing is World War III. It's just taking place like a baseline in Black Sabbath. It's, slow speed, right? Slow shutter doom. But it's all unrestricted warfare. And we're watching it unfold in front of us. And it has now moved to a hot phase. But all of the other phases are continuing at the same time. So recently, Sergei Lavrov tried to fly to Serbia to visit. He's the, foreign minister for fucking Russia, which has, extensive historical contacts with Serbia. And his jet was told to turn around because they couldn't cross NATO airspace. And so Serbia is completely surrounded. The one way that Serbia could reach the sea where it has a claim is through Montenegro. And Montenegro used to be very, very tight with Serbia. But that has changed in recent days. So if my thinking about this is in any way accurate, you would expect right now, when Serbia has a serious tension going on with Kosovo and they're talking about sending in their own troops, which they're permitted to do under international agreements to protect the Serbs there, the EU's getting all worked up about it. Serbia's acting like they're going to do something. Roadblocks have been set up. The Serbs in Kosovo are pissed. They apparently took over some kind of local council hall of some kind. Anyway, this area is beginning to get real hinky, right?
The issue with Lavrov as well, we should comment on, is very serious, because when you unilaterally declare that a country is not allowed to conduct diplomacy with another nation that by third parties, you're effectively taking out all peaceful possibilities from the equation for that relationship.
Yeah, and it's a blockade, de facto blockade, right? And so what's important for Serbia, if it ever wanted to do anything, yeah, exactly. Again, cannot emphasize the point enough. What we're really talking about here is a war that is, except for what's now happening in Ukraine, is something that they expect the slobbering imbeciles in the West to not notice, because the individual frames, as they flash before your eyes, fall below your flicker fusion threshold. It's like looking at a Nickelodeon wheel. When it's spinning fast enough, you can see the continuous series of movements. But when it's not, it seems like these are just isolated snapshot pictures. And again, this is why what we're talking about is important, because as you begin to look at it with a broader context, you can see that all of these things that seem isolated are quite closely connected. And the last thing they want you to do here is know fuck all about it. So if I'm right, Serbia, if Charlie's right, if we're in a war and Serbia has been surrounded and now its access via Montenegro to the sea is cut off, right? Then we should expect to see some things happening now in Montenegro. But before I go look at that, to go test that idea, let's remember again what happened. Georgia in 2008. Georgia was a targeted state for Piłsudski's Prometheanism idea, right? And then we have Syria in 2010. Now, the Arab Spring is a bunch of other things also, but what it most definitely was an attempt to cut Russia off from its military bases for the Navy and Russian air base. There's Tartus and Latakia. And so in 2008, we tried to, the Soros globalist faction tried to screw Russia in Georgia. And then in 2010, in addition to doing many other things, one of their gimmies was they were going to tell Russia they could fuck off because they were going to rebuild Syria in whatever image they thought was appropriate. And Russia said not just no, but hell no, and sent troops down. Then you see Maidan in 2014, which has Soros money. And then Maidan seemed to be setting the stage for Duda to come online in Poland with the Justice and Freedom Party. And he comes in 2015. And then you've got the Belarus issues in 2020 and 2021. Belarus was another major country that was outlined to be targeted by intelligence services and was targeted by intelligence services under Piłsudski. And then you have the stuff in Kazakhstan in 2022. Let's take a quick look at some of these things.
Before you jump to that, let me just put a pin real quick in the relation you've given a lot of this to World War II. The key relation from my perspective is what was the lead up to the outbreak of hostilities proper in World War II, really before it was a world war, is not the partition of Poland, but before Poland was partitioned, Germany and Russia were dividing up Eastern and Central Europe between them. And there were negotiations between Russia and Germany over who's going to get the Baltics, who's going to get this, right? They were literally negotiating which parts of these countries were either going to be formally annexed or in their sphere of influence. And then, of course, it ended. Poland was the end of this process, where it was finally partitioned in a proper military conflict. And that's what's happening now, is NATO and Russia are in the same type of negotiation, only it's being conducted more as a more openly hostile process. It's a negotiation of who is going to own what. And World War II happened after all the space was eaten up, right? It wasn't until after Germany and Russia had totally consolidated their borders, basically, that then Germany goes to war with Russia. So we're looking at a similar situation where Ukraine is one of the only major states really left in play that's sort of not negotiated yet. And we're seeing that negotiation happen right now, violently. And in the Balkans, there are other places that are being negotiated as well. But basically, all the possible territory that could fall into either sphere of influence is being outlined, demarcated, and it will no longer be up for negotiation basically at that point. And what you would not necessarily be surprised by is basically the weaker potential power in that situation has a lot more incentive to go to war, which is the case with Germany, right? Like Germany was the weaker power in relation to the potential of the Soviet Union. That's why the Reich went to war with the Soviets, because they wanted to knock the Soviets out before the Soviet juggernaut came online, basically. And Russia is basically being put in the same position where it still has a powerful military, but it's being put in a position where NATO is going to become an insurmountable foe, which is obviously a very dangerous situation to put a country like Russia in.
Right. And so we see essentially it's a von Clausewitz idea. War is the extension of politics by other means. And so, yeah, they're, as you say, Charlie, quote unquote, negotiating it now. But yeah, so we had Georgia in 2008. We had Syria in 2010, both directed at Russia. In the case of Syria, of course, it was part of a much larger gambit that had to do with the Middle East as well, and Israel. Then we had Maidan in 2014. Then we have Duda, who comes rolling in, right? And this is in 2015. If you go look at these old articles, this is from 2015. Andrzej Duda victory in Polish presidential election signals shift to the right. Wow. Incumbent Bronislaw Komorowski unseated despite years of fast economic growth and unprecedented stability. Everybody expected Komorowski to win. And in fact, at the time, they called it a surprise election loss because all of the polling had indicated that Komorowski was going to stay in office. But weird, you have the thing with the Maidan, and then you have the business with Duda coming in. Just wow. Now, people have said that I'm trying to claim that he just came out of nowhere. No, he had political roles previously. My point, however, is that he was not expected to win. The incumbent, who had been doing quite well, was expected to win. And then I guess we had, a fortification, I would have to guess, or perhaps it was just enough to, pump the necessary money in to get the result you want. But I don't think there can be any question that Andrzej Duda and his party were absolutely selected by the United States to come online after the Maidan stuff. And then the first thing that they started doing was signing big deals for military development with the United States. And then we saw Trump come in and give them all kinds of weapons and equipment. And we have seen, I believe, a shift in emphasis from basing U.S. troops in Germany and moving them over to Poland, right?
Yeah, that was announced earlier. In fact, even with this administration, during the Trump administration, yes, that there was stuff that between Poland and the United States, there was even that whole Fort Trump controversy thing. However, earlier this year, on October 31st, an announcement had been made that there's actually going to be a substantial movement of forces towards into rotation into Poland. So, they're a regular contributor to NATO missions, but 10,000 U.S. personnel are already in there as well.
And they're calling it rotating because that's a way of saying that they're not permanently based there, but the base is permanent and the troops are there at their numbers permanently. They're just rotated in and out from different countries. And to further point, when we're talking about this stuff with Duda here, he came into office before Trump was in office and immediately started cutting these deals with the U.S. So we've seen a consistent pattern from the Obama administration through to the Trump administration and now to the Biden administration. And the common element is that they're backing Poland here as sort of the center of new development and military gravity for the things that they envision. So after Georgia, after Syria, after Maidan, after Duda, then we have Belarus in 2020.
Before we get there, just want to hammer the point on Duda, that the first thing he did after assuming office, I think literally the next day after being sworn in his speech to Poland's parliament, is that he called for a stronger NATO presence in this country to counter military threat from Russia. What? That just sort of comes out of nowhere, right? And I mean, you're literally calling for other countries to base their military in your country. I mean, where is this coming from? He just opens out with that. I want more NATO forces in my country due to military threats from Russia. And so it's the rhetoric plus the deals that are happening.
And let's put a dollar value on this as well. So this is from the same October 31st report. Is that the United States has approximately $20 billion in active government-to-government sales cases with Poland under the Foreign Military Sales Service system. The FMS cases noted to Congress are listed here, and recent and significant sales include M1A2 main battle tanks, Javelin missiles and Javelin command launch units, 32 F-35 Joint Strike Fighters, plus services and support, high mobility artillery, rocket systems, HIMARS, F-16 follow-on support, and it goes so much more to where even earlier they were talking about that the United States is going to transfer $288 million that have already been approved for military financing funds for the Polish military, conveniently at the same time that a American Abrams tank academy is going to be launched in Poland, and they're expecting that 116 M1 Abrams main battle tanks are going to be transferred there, while those T-72 main battle tanks are going to be sent over to Ukraine. So most of the Soviet surplus and things that have been stocked up have been sent thoroughly out from Poland and other nations to Ukraine, while more American aid and things that I would easily call strategic tripwires are being flooded into the country.
Right. And we even have the deal with South Korea as well for HIMARS substitutes, I believe. A ludicrous number of them, actually.
And
Poland is doing tanks as well. Poland is doing a massive military buildup right now, which is important because, as I said, historically, Poland is not some warm, fuzzy country. Poland is a militaristic country out of necessity, right? That's not a slight. They're a militaristic country, and they're engaging in that tendency right now to a very large degree.
Yep. And you cannot consider Poland independently from Ukraine because, again, as we've seen, Piłsudski's Prometheanism was all about bringing Poland together with Ukraine. As I talked about in my stream last night, like when Poland, the First Republic, was first being established, and the Soviets, the Russians were in the midst of their own civil war, and Wrangel was beginning to make strides down, coming out of Crimea. Denikin had been smashed. And some of these other generals had been smashed earlier, but Wrangel was getting a bit of support from Western powers, but Poland was getting a lot of it, and Poland was giving the Soviets a bloody nose and was wanting to move into the Ukraine. And then Poland finally backed off, and the Red Army reasserted its control in Ukraine. Again, for people who don't know Ukraine or whatever, it means borderlands. And it's not one fucking country. It's a group of countries. They're very different. They fight amongst themselves. Basically, everyone here has to understand that what's going on in Ukraine right now should not be called the Russian invasion. It should be called the Ukrainian Civil War. But of course, it doesn't suit anyone to call it that. And the Russian invasion should have been called the Russian intervention. But of course, again, it doesn't suit anyone to call it that because they like the fiction of a single ethnos. That's why, like I was talking about in my stream last night, you get people like Usyk and Lomachenko being elevated into the heights of boxing, and I'm not saying that both of them aren't great boxers. In particular, Lomachenko is like fucking stunning. He's incredibly good. But the point is that they get them out there. They push the nationalism. They push that image in the West. They push that image for domestic consumption in Ukraine. You got people like Usyk showing up with his head shaved and a forelock, and he's wearing, a traditional Ukrainian shirt with embroidery. They love to push nationalism, and they're aware of it. They know how to do it. The gay knows how to do it. And they're perfectly happy to do so. So it's all part of the same picture, in my view, of pumping East European nationalism. This was the big sort of I'm an imbecile moment where I realized, like, all those years of doing videos about Poland and putting clips up about, of where the slate for the video, the thumbnail is like, a winged hussar, and, those little balls that are red and white, and they're, the joke memes about Poland strong, right? Not that Poland doesn't have a right to try to determine its own future, not that I'm against Polish nationalism, none of that. However, it's very clear to me now that the GA was perfectly happy to push this because it serves their ends. And so, Russia has been getting hammered from all these directions. Again, now Belarus is another country that was targeted by, or a potential country at the time it was targeted because it was under Soviet control, by Piłsudski with his Prometheanism. So, Georgia 2008, Syria 2010, the Maidan in Ukraine in 2014, Duda in 2015, then Belarus in 2020 and 2021, where they were trying to peel Belarus off. And that didn't work out. There's a whole long, extensive thing on what was going on there. Take a look at it over on Wikipedia. I'm not going to go into it in depth now, but you have to understand it did happen. It's in sequence. It's part of a general pattern, and all of it is aimed at Russia. All of it. And then some of you will remember, because I covered it at the time, there was the 2022 Kazakh unrest that may have had Turkey involved in it, right? And this is round about the time, it's actually prior to this, that Turkey is beginning to help Ukraine and selling them drones and pushing this military cooperation angle. So then there are issues in Kazakhstan, which are intended to cause problems for Russia and the Collective Security Treaty Organization that they put together. And they managed to put that down. But I'll tell you, go do some searches for what's going on in Kazakhstan, and they're trying to shake that up again, too. So now, with all of this stuff going on in the background and the way we see how it would fit into these pictures of cutting Russia off, of driving Russia back so it becomes essentially an Asian power and can be told to fuck off. It's essentially driven out of the Black Sea region. They're told that they can sell their oil and their gas to India and China maybe, but otherwise they should fuck off as regards Europe. They're going to be cut off. They're going to be blocked. Then we get to this business of how Serbia is being surrounded with its old relationships. And again, everybody has to understand that Serbia and the bombing of Belgrade and all that stuff was when Putin appeared for the first time. Most of you are probably not old enough to remember, but I remember, basically we were busy just bombing the shit out of everything we wanted to in former Yugoslavia. And suddenly, out of nowhere, it shocked everyone. There was this big thing about Russian paratroopers dropping into Belgrade and taking control of the airport there in Serbia. And that was when the whole Yeltsin program disappeared. Putin came to the forefront, and it was like pretty clear, wait a minute, we draw the line with this. And now, as I said, Serbia is being surrounded. They need to get to the sea here. And if they can't, then how does Serbia connect with Russia? Well, one possible way they could do it, if it was the old system, they could go up and down the Danube. But now Romania is very much in NATO control. Moldova is contested, but right now NATO-backed, gay-backed forces control Moldova. Bulgaria was firmly in the hands of the West up until just recently, but now it seems they've been peeled back away. Montenegro, however, would be key based on my assumption. So let's just go and look and see what we see as news about Montenegro from the last few days. First off, we see Montenegro's special state prosecutor arrested for abuse of office. So we see the lawfare stuff going into play, the special, basically remove anybody from power who would use legal mechanisms to change the situation on the ground. That's straight out of the Soros playbook, the US playbook, all of that crap, right? Now, this is from the last couple days. Note that this is also an article being put together by a Turk. Interesting. Öztürk. Protests held as lawmakers vote to adopt controversial law restricting the president's powers to form a government. Police used tear gas to disperse protesters. Does this look like Russia and Serbia might be trying to push to change the situation there? And meanwhile, the West is pushing back to say, fuck you, Serbia. You're going to stay bottled up just like we want you, and you can't expect help from Russia. So get with the program. Political crisis in Montenegro is accelerating, right? These are all from the last few days, right? So these various phenomena that seem to be disconnected are actually connected, and you have to understand this context for what's going on in the Ukraine. You know, if everybody wants to fucking slobber about the rat and how brave he is and put, you know, Ukrainian flags in their Twitter profiles or whatever, you know, do as you please. But I believe we should all know what's actually going on, right? The Byzantine collection of political forces is threatening stability at a crucial time for this Western Balkan nation. Yeah, a crucial time for everyone, because what's essentially going on is we're watching this this unrestricted warfare very likely accelerate. And you know, there are other interesting things. You know, this is exactly the kind of gay crap you'd expect. GAE crap, GA-AE crap you would expect. Montenegro digital nomads obtaining residence permits. They basically moved in. They flipped Montenegro to be, you know, EU, NATO, Western paused. And the first thing they're trying to do is set it up so that basically anybody from around the rest of Europe, even though Montenegro isn't in the EU, they can all just go live there because they've changed the laws. I wonder if those digital nomads, I wonder if a large proportion of them would be activists. As many activists as necessary to begin to implement the various programs of color revolution people on the ground in that country, right? So you have to understand things really are going on. Here's another one, made me laugh my fucking ass off. If I lived in Montenegro, I'd be crying. Remember, these are all from the last few days. The U.S. Peace Corps is going to help Montenegro's primary schools. Right. I wonder what they're going to teach them. Do you guys wonder what they're going to teach them?
Gay butt sex.
If I had to guess, yeah, I'm not a betting man, and I would likely bet on that. Right. So this is this larger picture that we're looking at here. It has to do with this whole business of cutting Russia off and cutting off its historical pseudopods that sort of stretch out into Europe as zones of influence. You know, the Baltics have been neatly cut away. They're playing games with cutting them off at the Suwalki Gap. They've made strong moves to pull Ukraine completely away from them. And remember, there's a great clip over on a series of clips over on Jimmy Thomas' channel that look at Ukraine from an operational perspective. And if you actually look at let me see here, topographical map of Europe, you'll understand why Russia, can't even spell, sorry people, why Russia is so concerned about this shit. Because once you're over into Western Ukraine, let me find a big enough version of this map. Is that large enough? Yeah, that will be once it loads. Once you get past, oh, for fuck's sake, hang on, people. One of these that's of sufficient size, right? This will work. Okay, so once you get come on now. Once you get over here into these eastern regions of Ukraine, right? It's not perfectly flat country. It's not quite as flat like areas of Poland with the trans-European plain.
No, I've looked at a lot of topography maps, though, in relation to the war, and the differences between regions close to each other are a few hundred feet. I mean, this is not particularly treacherous terrain. It's not like the Rocky
it's easy
Mountains or
for and as quite right. And as the Jimmy Thomas stuff points out, you know, you have to look at it at an operational level. You're not talking about sending in one column. You're talking about divisions and, you know, how widely they would need to be deployed in order to be secure from flanking and this kind of stuff as they move forward, you know, at the operational level to invade a country. And once you get past some of these areas, especially once you get past the Dnieper here, but certainly as you get up into the northern eastern reaches of Ukraine, it's basically just a straight shot that, you know, mechanized divisions, tank divisions, the rest, or armies and tank units and the rest could head north and be basically the ring road of Moscow quite quickly. Now, I have to say this again, man, because there will be fools. We're not saying we like Putin. We're not saying Putin is our guy. We're not saying that Russia's right or Poland's right, or that either one of them is wrong. we're saying that this has to do with realpolitik and actual security concerns. Poland's, Ukraine's, to whatever extent it actually is a nation, which I have to kind of laugh at. Russia's, obviously NATO's playing its games. But that's another reason why this business of Ukraine is a particular concern for Russia. Now, I know we're going to do a second one of these, and we have about a half hour left because I know you guys want to cut it at 2 hours. For those who are watching, we're definitely going to come back and revisit this. Maybe we'll be able to get a proper mentat who knows World War II well enough to unpack some aspects of the origins of all of this. But I do know I've got over here, where'd I put it? There's a great paper here that I know I've read much of it, not all of it at this point. I think Charlemagne has read some of it too. It's put together by somebody who looks like they've got a proper East, or at least partially East European name. So someone who presumably speaks Polish and other necessary primary sources. It's called The Evolution of Prometheanism, Piłsudski's Strategy and Its Impact on 21st Century World Affairs. It goes into great detail about Poles who split after World War II and went to the United States. It talks about the Giedroyc guy doing his stuff with Kultura Journal in France. It talks about Brzezinski pushing these kinds of ideas. And there are others because there were, for example, there's a Polish-born Georgian military guy who came over and achieved a very high rank in the United States who's pushing these same Prometheanism ideas. So a lot of people have not a lot, but few people have come in and bitched at me, like last night in my stream with Woes. They're saying, oh, you're just making too much of an old idea. It has nothing to do with Prometheanism now. No, there are, as outlined in this paper, and I don't think this paper goes far enough, frankly, plenty of explicit examples of how this thinking made its way into the United States and became the basis of some more or less explicit at times aspects of U.S. foreign policy and geostrategic thinking. One last thing I want to point out here, and then I want to see, what other things you guys want to cover, or maybe, if people in the chat have questions, throw them in. But another thing I want to point out here is that it's a twofold function. You have to understand that over here, all these areas of Europe, more broadly, because Austria is getting it in the neck too. And we'll see what's going on with the Czech Republic. But, basically Austria and certainly the rest of these countries further west, we're getting as much diversity down here in the Balkans too, Greece, certainly. We're getting so much diversity that it's like Trump used to say, you'll be tired of asking for more wins. You'll be tired of asking for more diversity because we're just going to give you more and more and more diversity. Meanwhile, backed by the United States, we've got relatively, I say that in a qualified sense, relatively nationalistic and relatively homogenous states here where nationalism is being encouraged. So I think an important aspect of all of this that we need to understand is that this is the part that suits the United States. They can build in this strong alternative to Western Europe, and it's going to keep Germany from being able to connect with Russia. And if they do try, for example, with underwater pipelines for gas, they'll just fucking blow them up, as we just saw. So it's not just about containing Russia. It's ensuring that there cannot be economic cooperation between Germany and Russia. You've got all of this know-how in Western Europe. You've got all of this skill. You've got all of these relatively high-functioning, high-conscientiousness, civilized populations. The more you move over into, let's say, maybe it starts with areas, or once upon a time started with areas of Eastern Poland, and certainly some of the areas of Romania and Bulgaria today, certainly Ukraine, don't know about Belarus, but you start getting over here into the Slavic populations that were, as recently as 100 years ago under Stalin, dragged kicking and screaming out of the 13th century. So they don't have as much know-how. They don't have as much conscientiousness. They don't have the can-do attitudes of, for example, a Protestant country in Western Europe like Germany or Denmark or the Netherlands, right? But what they do have is vast resources, enormous amounts of resources, and a population that could begin to operate, given time, at a level similar, if not quite at the level of productivity and conscientiousness of Western Europe. So these groups cannot be allowed to connect, because then you would get a power, to come back to what Prude was talking about earlier, to Mackinder and Spickman. You'd have someone, or Speakman, however you pronounce it, you'd essentially have one potential power dominating Eurasia, which is considered the world island. And that would threaten the naval powers, whether it's UK or at its current incarnation, where the new the US Navy is the new global policeman. So this is a way to fuck Europe, also Western Europe. They just get tons of diversity, and they deindustrialize, and they're not allowed to connect for these resources here. And any resources that do come to them in their diversified state are going to come by sea, which means they're subject to interdiction by the world's great naval power. So I wanted to throw that in there too. Now, I don't know if we have questions in the chat. I don't know if there's likely all kinds of stuff that you guys have wanted to jump in with, and I've just been running my mouth. So, Prude, Charlemagne, I'll take a look at the chat, see if we have questions, and what other things do you think we need to look at in future? What have I missed? Is there anything that you guys wanted to share?
Well, it was funny that you had mentioned sort of the diversity bit, because we haven't even talked about Turkey's role to play here, either in the current conflict in Ukraine or just its relationship and its leverage that it has over Western Europe and the continent itself, not to mention getting vital concessions from Finland and such to get them to be fast-tracked towards NATO accession. And so we were talking about this last year around Thanksgiving, Oliver. You and I were talking about the situation with the migrant crisis on the border between Belarus and Poland, and that there had been a significant amount of flights, both out of places like Egypt and Ankara and other places that had been, given some support by the Turkish government to do so, and that the European Union more or less has to deal with a 3 million plus trump card that migrants that, at any point in time, Erdogan can say, F you on, I can release them if I want, which creates more tensions. And even in the problem with Montenegro, right, that's already overflowing with issues from, not only the collapse of Yugoslavia, but Kosovo's declared independence in 2008, which has already seen its own flare-ups, and the government had collapsed because we haven't even talked about sort of like the cultural concerns of the Serbian Orthodox Church, and that the prime minister of Montenegro wanted to pass a law sort of normalizing relations with them for one of the few parts of their patriarchate that has an established existence inside Montenegro, which caused trouble. And now the only, group of parties that are trying to pass situations in Montenegro are pro-Serbian coalitions. And so things are already getting more stressed and tenuous there. So to overall sort of look at the situation, I think that there's still a lot of old style, old school thinking with a new twist on it, just as the stream had talked about. Haven't we all seen this all before? Because, we get the ideas of Mackinder and Speakman sort of updated with Brzezinski trying to get these ideas about how can we get Poland and Hungary to work together. And, I feel very concerned, genuinely, actually, for like Hungarian nationalists, because I know quite a few of them. And I get a little concerned when there's a lot of American conservative talking points and pundits are all sort of moving over there and trying to get their talks or their interviews with people, because I don't want the Americans to get involved in that country. But it is a little concerning when individuals like Tucker Carlson is making a big deal out of it, or hosting CPAC over there, or Rod Dreher moving to Hungary. It's just things to be concerned about. But overall, I think that what we've only begun to scratch the surface of is that taking a look at old socio-political concepts and how the American government and its own policy, which for right now we've seen blue check marks and academics and, foreign policy pundits on television talk about the need to de-Putinize and denuclearize Russia and to break it up and decolonialize it, almost as if that is literally telling the Russian state, we do not want you to exist anymore. That is an existential threat and an existential question. You don't have to be pro-Russia or pro-Putin to realize that the stakes of the game are pretty damn high. And we saw it very blatantly just a few weeks ago with the whole missile thing in Polish territory. And these ideas, as old as they may be, are going to be the foundational cornerstones for whatever is going to come next in this present day and age of unrestricted warfare. And it covers many countries, many avenues of economic and digital, appearances, disinformation, etc. And it's important for these ideas to be discussed because they are the bedrock for what we're going to see today and in the future.
Right on.
Yeah.
Before you jump in, Charlemagne, let me just throw one last point because I didn't cover this. You could see, I mentioned, and I've been looking at it, that Bulgaria seemed to be firmly in the pocket of Western powers. And now there's been a pushback. And the guy who seemed like he'd been pushed out of power has come forward again, and they've had to form a coalition with him. I haven't been looking at it recently, but I have to add, because there's definitely stuff going on in Bulgaria too. I don't think the odds of Russia being able to do anything in Romania at this point are good at all. I think the best bet for Russia to be able to get to Serbia, which is a part of this bigger picture that we're talking about right now, Bulgaria and Montenegro should be in our consideration set, and we should all be looking at the news both in Bulgaria and Montenegro, because basically Russia's screwed if it can't, and Serbia is screwed if they cannot reach Serbia. And so they're going to have to get an overland corridor. And in many respects, Bulgaria is even better, because Russia could get to Bulgaria and go overland without having to, potentially have itself cut off passing through the straits, at the Boğaz here and the Sea of Marmara and Çanakkale. Right. So that's another thing, Montenegro and Bulgaria. So I want to emphasize Montenegro because it does matter, but I think we're going to be seeing a lot more go on in Bulgaria too. If I had to guess, it's fucking spy-tastic in Montenegro and Bulgaria right now. I'm sure there are tons of people who claim to be Fulbright scholars and digital nomads and writing travel journals and, just hanging out in the youth hostels. Like there's shit's going on in both these countries. Sorry, Charlie. Go on, please.
I wanted to emphasize the point about this really being about, at an even larger level, smashing Europe as well. This isn't just about Russia. It's about Europe too. And there's even more historical backdrop for all of this. We can go as far back as the Napoleonic Wars. What did Napoleon do? What was he trying to implement? Was this continental system, an economic system that united the entire continent? The Anglos were not having that, and they shut it down. World War I, Germany, Austro-Hungarian Empire getting a little too influential, large. Germany's building a navy, starting to colonize. Once again, the Anglos are not having that. World War II, Germany is basically consolidating the whole continent. Once again, the Anglos and the Americans are not having that, and they shut it down. Every time Europe begins to cohere as a single economic unit that can threaten the Anglo-American dominance of economics, they shut it down. So the goal of America and the Anglo in general at this point is really to keep Europe and Russia in a state of permanent fragmentation, right? This is not only about, Russia, the Cold War. It's also about Europe. Both of these powers, the U.S. effectively has the same view of, in a sense, in that they want both of these places fragmented forever so that they can never actually form a single economic bloc that can actually compete with the U.S., right? That's part of what the Three Seas Initiative is to maintain a state of fragmentation, both west and east. So it's really important to understand that, and that this is all part of a historical pattern that repeats over and over and over again. It's not like this is some weird theory that's never happened before. This is how the Anglo-Americans do business, so to speak. And then the other thing I would put out there, obviously this is going to upset people, but look, countries like Belarus and Ukraine, they just do not have the same, degree of national identity that a country like Poland does, right? Ridiculous for me to suggest that the American
Belarus, I'm
nation,
not sure about.
Belarus has existed a lot longer, but it's always been subservient to either Poland or Russia. Belarus has existed as a nation more than Ukraine has, but it hasn't been in a dominant position.
Yeah, Ukraine is basically about as old as you are, Charlie.
Ukraine's basically never had a state, right? The Russians created really the first consolidated Ukrainian state. But the idea of a Ukrainian nationality is a complete fiction. As you pointed out, the idea of a French nationality is kind of a fiction. I mean, looking at Ukraine on the map here and the size of it, it's kind of obviously absurd to think that Ukraine is one nation. When we look at the division just in land masses of similar size. And again, I would reflect this back on myself and suggest that it would be ridiculous for me to say that, the American nationality has the same degree of historical basis or historicity to it that's a country like Poland does. These are just facts. Ukrainians will get mad about this, but it doesn't matter how strongly a Ukrainian feels about their nation. The historical facts are what they are. So I think that it's important to just point that out.
Yeah, there's a guy in the chat saying that, Ukrainians are Proto-Mesopotamians, is saying you're conflating political elite with nation and nationality with regard to Ukraine. No. Half of Ukraine, or the western portions of Ukraine, are more predominantly Catholic. The eastern portions are more predominantly Orthodox. The western portions are speaking Ukrainian more. The eastern portions are speaking Russian more. And through all the history of this place, again, which the name of which means fucking borderlands, great imperial powers, first the Ottomans, later the Austro-Hungarians, certainly the Poles and the Russians, all contested there. And in the course of that contesting, each of those imperial powers backed elites, but then through a trickle-down process, those elites represented their different factions. Again, what's going on in Ukraine is a civil war, and it's the idea that all of it is a nation, or that we're just talking about the elites, but really, a farmer in eastern Ukraine who is Orthodox and spoke Russian, and a farmer in at the opposite end of the country who's Catholic and sees himself as tied more to the West and speaks Ukrainian more. No, that's not a false division predicated upon some fiction with overemphasis of the elites. No. Sorry, Charlemagne.
Yeah, absolutely. And we can say it's regrettable that a Ukrainian nation state was never able to emerge on its own. We can say that's regrettable. It is something that Ukrainian peoples have wanted for centuries, and they were simply never able to do that because of other imperial powers. So there are other nations in Ukraine that aren't Polish, right? There's something in Ukraine that is distinctly not Poland, not Russia, but it's not one single consolidated identity. There are many of them. And these are just this is just historical fact as far as I'm concerned. It's, again, this isn't a polemic point. It's just something that I think needs to be understood. And this sort
like
of ties
fucking
into
German-speaking Mennonites and Tatars. I mean, and Circassians. I mean, it's just dumb. But sorry, Charlie.
Yeah, into another thing that I wanted to mention is Eastern Europeans, I've noticed from talking to them over the years, get very upset when you suggest that anything related to their nationality is not purely homegrown and like eternal, and especially they get mad if you suggest things are being influenced by the United States. And I think that this refusal to see the hand of the Americans in particular at work in their national politics actually makes them more susceptible to being manipulated, because they really don't want to see it. And look, I'm not being an American chauvinist here when I'm saying that. We're talking about what is obviously going on in this case. There's a lot of I don't really regard anything we've even said here at this point as particularly speculative, because most of what we said is pretty well documented from the research we've done. And so, yeah, I think that point needs to be made as well, which is going to upset people. But in my experience, I've found that Eastern Europeans, they just don't take well to the suggestion that the Americans are manipulating their countries, even when they obviously are. And I think it makes them more susceptible to it. I don't like this. I don't want America messing in their national politics, but it's happening. I'm sorry to say.
Yeah, it's an
I
unfortunate geopolitical reality. Like, these things do happen. And I think what really gets lost in the weeds, especially when Americans or Eastern Europeans or even just Americans debating amongst each other, I mean, this whole conflict in Ukraine has caused so many debates and schisms over just, well, what am I politically or ideologically meant to interpret this as? I mean, you need to be looking at this, I think, through the sheerest lens of Machiavellian realpolitik, because people are in it to play for keeps. And I mean, in regards to like Eastern European politics, I mean, the same thing also happens within America as well. I mean, when that whole missile thing had landed in Poland, who was like the first person to go out and tweet for blood? It wasn't even the Polish government. It was fucking Jack Posobiec, a Polish American intelligence agent who has been involved in sort of these like weird GOP Steve Bannon style politics and is very big on the Poland Stronk meme alongside his Catholicism. And so it's just like these things happen every day. And if that wonderful text, Unrestricted Warfare, back in 1999 tells us anything, is that the traditional combat space and the non-combat space, the border between those two spaces has become blurred, if not all but non-existent now. And so that means even whether we know it or not, we can be tweeting out or, supporting or liking things that were engineered by governments, by intelligence agencies, or propaganda. I mean, for one thing that the libs did shrill about with Trump is that, yeah, there was Russian propaganda into the United States. It targeted a lot of like Dixie affiliated Southern nationalist groups, to a point where, like the Russian bear over the, Confederate stars and bars and such. So it goes both ways. But when it comes to the total media blackout listing, banning RT, Russia Today, from other countries, it illustrates to me the sheer fact that, yeah, this is the game that the Americans play and that they're really good at it. And I don't want the Americans to be involved in it either. I mentioned that earlier with the Hungarians, but unfortunately, this is what is at stake right now, is a multifaceted way to separate the continental Europe, Germany, France, Switzerland, the rest of them, away from the East, and to have an effective intermarium 3 Cs initiative backed by the US and other global financial interests like Japan and China to shut out both Russia and the European continent. And that's going to have devastating consequences. And it already has now for those who live abroad listening or to watch this, because we hear from Morgoth all the time how expensive energy is in the UK. I can only imagine how bad it is in other countries.
And look, the way this all works is not just, the US is just giving everyone orders or something. I mean, what does Poland get out of this? Poland gets to be the centerpiece of this huge economic bloc, right? From the Polish perspective, it even makes sense to do what they are doing in terms of their military alliance with the United States, because this whole 3Cs initiative is centered around Poland. Poland effectively is going to be supplanting Germany as the main economic player in Eastern Europe. In Central Europe, sorry. That's the idea behind this entire thing. If you look at their documentation, for example, they tout how the GDP growth is, 3% year over year in all these countries, which is apparently a huge number. I don't know a whole lot about economics in that sense, but the 3Cs initiative says that the growth potential in these countries is enormous, and it's all centered around Poland. If you look at who's the key player in the 3Cs initiative and the funding behind it, which I looked into fairly extensively, Poland is the center here. So Poland is getting something out of this from their perspective. Whether or not it's ultimately good for them or not, that's really for the Poles to decide. But we have to point out what's going on here. This isn't just these states aren't acting independently. They're literally asking for the U.S. to be more involved, please, in their economies and politics.
And we also We also have to point out very good points, Charlemagne, and I want to throw in one more, which is that by setting up this block, as we talked about, that divides. I mean, this is three C's, which is more economic, right? But we're very likely going to see some sort of animal come together that involves military cooperation here. We're certainly seeing many of these countries that had the Warsaw Pact military and arms stockpiles. They've poured all of that into Ukraine, which then necessitates that they have to buy new weapons to replace what they've gotten rid of from their arsenals. And then what's going to happen is the quote unquote diplomats and the arms companies are going to come in and say, well, we don't want to have the problems of having 16 different platforms here in terms of APCs. And we don't want 20 different platforms, that some of them may be this standard or that standard, right? We're already integrating our roadways and our infrastructure and our energy. Now's a perfect time, since we just, basically sent all those weapons into Ukraine and we don't have any anymore. Let's buy weapons that are all kind of uniform, right? We're going to get a bunch of more uniform weapons and a basis for military cooperation and a strong stimulus in the form of this war that brings these countries together. They get to remain relatively, again, I emphasize relatively homogenous, in comparison to those who are enjoying all the full rape-tastic fruits of diversity in the West, and they become a group that obviates what would otherwise be a stronger requirement for the formation of an EU army. The United States can easily come in and say, well, we've got this group that are cooperating here and they form an economic bloc. And yes, many of them may be in NATO, but, we've got to reward them in a particular way because of the extra effort that they're making in order to be a buffer between Russia and Western Europe. So, you guys don't have to create standing armies. You can just pump some of your money in. So we'll keep you weak and more or less bloodless, keeping this alive as a military animal that's relatively more nationalistic. And as a result, you can also push back on the idea that it really needs to become an EU army. So that's another point that I think is worth bringing up. Well, we're coming up on the end, gents. If we want to get in and out under 2 hours, what have I not given you guys the opportunity to say that's been missed?
Well, we could say more on the 3 Siege initiative and get into some of the background. I'm happy to stay till the 3-hour mark if you guys have the energy. I know Prudentialist is ill, and maybe we have questions in chat. But Prue, do you have anything else to say at the moment?
Well, the only 1 second.
While Prude's getting himself together, I'll just say, yeah, I'm not up for 3 hours just tonight, but I am very keen to come back and look at this further, including 3 Cs, and I'd also be keen to do that relatively soon as well, because
I
this
agree.
is very much the subject of the day.
We have a lot here that we haven't even talked about yet. I feel like this is only an introduction, really, to what's going on here. Prudentialist, are you back?
Yeah, no. The whole 3 Cs initiative is very much cropped from the Polish Intermarium project. It was started by Duda, and like I mentioned at the beginning, the former Croatian president, Kolinda Grabar-Kitarovic, and her whole background is just aligned with the American foreign policy. She worked closely with George W. Bush. She has a diplomatic career. She was a Fulbright scholar. And, as Oliver had pointed out, the stunning victory surprise of President Duda during his election. And the first things that these two really work together on is the 3 Siege initiative and bolstering more military aid into Poland. So whatever relation, like you had mentioned, Charles, like whatever we get out of this isn't going to be explicitly pro-US. Obviously, Poland and Croatia and these 3 Cs initiative parties are going to see a benefit from it. They are going to see an increase in their quality of life, access to trade goods and resources, and have what appears to be a US backed, or at least most likely to have US support and defense of its own natural gas industry and pipelines that is going to be aligned with sort of their interests. Because as we've seen with Nord Stream 2's sabotage, that really it's no holds bar at this point, and energy resources are still going to be one of the key things that nations are going to fight over. And that's the one thing that, Russia has had leverage on with the continent of Europe for the longest time. And this war has really stressed the impact that's going to have in the future, leaving them to, sell cheap liquid natural gas and oil to India and China, and for China to make a quick buck to sell it back to the Europeans at a much higher market rate than what they would have traditionally got buying it through Russia. But unfortunately, due to all of this, we're watching our friends overseas suffer through high energy prices and freezing cold temperatures. And at the same time, right, this war continues to rage on, and these old concepts are just coming back again with a modern twist.
Let me add to one thing I did want to add is we've mentioned Polish emigres a few times. Polish emigres are a very influential, important group, especially in 20th century Polish history when the country basically didn't exist for most of the time. I think the Kultura magazine, which was critical in terms of speaking out against communism and bringing oh geez, is it is it Lech Walesa? I don't know how to pronounce the Polish names, but
Lech Walesa, I think.
Okay,
Something like that.
I won't even. But this magazine was a critical anti-communist magazine, and Polish emigres have always been really important in terms of Polish politics. I mean, for example, one of the reasons that Franklin Roosevelt wanted to keep the deal giving Poland to Stalin secret was in order to not lose the 6 million strong Polish vote in the United States for the election. Like, this is something he was concerned about, is the Polish vote in America, right? Poles have a strong emigre community for obvious reasons. And these people, like Brzezinski and others we've mentioned, are influencing American policy in the direction of Prometheanism in their own ways. I mean, this is, again, the Posobiec example. This is happening. So that's important to bring up as well.
Oh, and just a fun fact, Brzezinski had 3 children, and one of them is Joe Scarborough's wife from MSNBC, so you know that it runs deep.
Yeah, that just must be a coincidence, right? Yeah. So, we definitely, that's a good point you raised at the end there, Prudentialist. We haven't even talked about the energy dimension. I have my suspicions that the original idea was Ukraine would get folded over fully into NATO and be peeled off of Russia, and they would develop, as you know, it's one of my hypotheses, Prudentialist, that they would develop large Black Sea natural gas reserves and just say, to hell with you, Russia, we can get what we need from Eastern Med sources and, LNG. There are a lot more LNG terminals on the coasts of Western Europe than people realize at this point. Black Sea, East Med, LNG, and further areas of development like the Zohr field or whatever coming out of Egypt. And we also haven't talked about the way in which, if Russia turns out to be very successful in Ukraine at the end of this miserable process, Turkey may well roll over in some respects into Russia's camp, and it looks like they're keeping their options open in that respect anyway. So yeah, there are a lot of angles to this that we should consider in future. If it's okay with you guys, let's circle around in the next couple of days and try to get a second one of these on the calendar, maybe with some further guests. I'll wait before considering, which ones are appropriate, because, you guys have been in on this since the beginning. So I'll talk to you guys and get your opinion. We'll move forward with unanimity, and treat this like an introduction, and then follow up with subsequent considerations of various aspects of this. I expect there's going to be much more to see in Bulgaria and in Montenegro, Serbia, Kosovo in short order. Greece is already well in the column for having large numbers of its population that do actually support Russia. which makes North Macedonia, which just got sorted out recently, all the more important, because if Greece ended up trying to be pro-Russian in any respect, if they wanted to go overland to Serbia, they'd be blocked by North Macedonia. It's all craziness. But yeah, a number of different angles on this we can consider in future. So before we do the final wrap up, gents, anything else you wanted to say?
There's two more things I want to add
Real
quick. One mistake I see Europeans make too is thinking that like the European Union is or could somehow be a pro-European institution. The European Union is another U.S. economic weapon. It's not pro-European in any sense. It is a tool of the United States to perform the types of geopolitics we talked about here. I think Europeans need to stop thinking that the European Union can somehow help them, because that's just not what it does. The 3 Seas Initiative is the same deal. This is an American tool of warfare. I don't really see any large political blocs at this point that I would characterize as pro-European. So I think that is a mistake because of, I don't know if it's because of the names or what, that Europeans seem to believe these things serve their interest when they don't, and they will not. You need new institutions. Other thing, I want to throw out some weird speculation, so I'm going to speculate now.
Speculation is always welcome on this.
One of the things I've been interested in is, why is Poland doing this just massive land army military buildup? Like, what is that army actually for? I mean, obviously it's for defense from Russia, but why do they need such an enormous army? I think one of the reasons why Poland might have this huge land army that it is now upgrading with high technology, basically, is because, okay, so the goal of NATO is to dissolve the Russian Federation, right? That's what this is all about. Europe, fragment Russia. Okay, so what happens when Russia fragments is you now have nuclear weapons everywhere. So I think the end state is that the Polish military goes on a UN-backed peacekeeping mission into the fragmented Russian state. It's not a war with Russia, because Russia no longer exists, and their goal is to secure all the nuclear weapons. I think that would basically be necessary, and why you see Poland maintaining this very large military force, which frankly it doesn't really need to pursue its reasonable political goals, I would say. So that's just a bit of speculation on my part. Why they're doing this huge buildup is not just to replace what's being sent to Ukraine, but because that army is there so that if this plan.
You cut out.
What do you do next? Is you have to invade those territories to secure nuclear weapons. So that's just my crazy idea that I just thought about while researching all this.
Right on. Well, we love speculation. I for my part, I understand where you're coming from when you say America, Charlemagne, but I would just, from my position, I would qualify that I don't think the EU is exactly a tool of the United States. I think that the United States is the primary tool of a group of cosmopolitan Atlanticists. And by that, I do not mean to suggest that it's just one tribe, although it does include some noteworthy tribes. But yeah, I think that the U.S. is the primary tool of global cosmopolitan Atlanticists, who also use the EU as their primary tool, but it's more like cat herding. And there are risks to allow that entity to come together too much. So they're also hedging their bets and setting up this sort of nationalistic band of Slavic countries and others to Professor Pohl's earlier point. Of course, Romania, not Slavs, the Balts, and some of these other countries don't. Hungary, of course, doesn't qualify in that respect. But anyway, so yeah, anything I missed with you, Prudentialist?
Well, I guess the only thing I would argue on this point, I think we'll have to look at it further, is going to be just the way in which you manage the ongoing energy crisis, because, there were already a lot of wordplay about oh, well, we're only halfway through December and all of these natural gas surpluses, we've ran out of them, which, doesn't even leave for the future for January or February or other European countries where it stays much colder for a lot longer past the official season of winter. And so, are you going to just continue to, ship over liquefied natural gas via cargo ports? Are you going to try and, renew discussions on, say, the East Med pipeline or however it may?
Uh-oh, sounds like Prude cut out too. Mr. Prudentialist?
Yeah.
Are we dealing with a rural internet wardrobe malfunction? Give him 1 second. Let's see if he comes back in. Well, I think that
well, we definitely need to do a follow-up on the energy situation.
Yeah, I think absolutely, yes. And I think we're going to be seeing more of that now because, as a lot of people might not have seen, but it sounds like Charlie saw it and a Prudentialist saw it. There's just a thing. There's a Bloomberg interview that's going around that's actually really funny. There's some dude, Jeff Curry from Goldman Sachs, global head of commodities research. And here, let me see if I could just play this as a close. Prude's out. We'll give him 1 second to come back. Let me see if I'm even... if I am able to share this because it's so damn funny. I know you've seen it, Charlemagne, but let me see if I can rewind it. And I'm going to play it for a second here, Charlie. Let me see if I can get it up on screen. And you can tell me whether, let's see, stop screen. Okay, we got that out. Share screen, window. Tell me, Charlemagne, can you hear this? Just let me see if this plays through.
No, I can't.
Did you hear that? Oh, damn it.
Yeah, this is a pain. Right. You got to go to settings. And I don't remember where it is.
Audio.
There's something in the menu you have to click to actually
it's something I have to do when I'm setting up the stream to share. So let me do this one more time. Let me add Prudentialist into the stream. Glad to see you back, sir. I'll try this one more time. If it doesn't work, to hell with it. Let me see. There's that.
But I don't know where it cut me off, Oliver. But the point I was trying to make was that you combine a large military force with Poland and getting access to American high technology, and you're talking about pipelines and the current crisis in Europe. That does kind of give you an effective military leverage over, economic access to pipelines and natural gas, because I think we all know that this net zero bullshit isn't going to work.
Yeah, and it's likely going to get even more interesting indeed. Thank you. Well, listen, this natural gas thing is not coming up easily, but if anybody wants to look it up, it's just type in Europe's natural gas surplus is quickly shrinking, according to Jeff Curry. So search for Europe's natural gas surplus is quickly shrinking. And you'll see this guy basically saying it looks like if it stays cold, the quote unquote surplus won't last through January, which is basically like, that could be construed as much as 3 weeks. So yeah, when they call it surplus, what they're saying is, for surplus, you can go ahead and read all the gas that we stockpiled and currently have. So yeah, this could be very, very interesting indeed. All right, so we're going to do a further stream on this as a follow-up, at least one more. I'll get together with Prudentialist and Charlemagne, and we'll put together a plan for that. And you will see an announcement made about it, and I'll post stuff over on Twitter. Please do follow Charlemagne. His various links, you can see them in the description down below. Please do follow the mighty Prudentialist. You can see links for his various channels down below. You'll also see links for my books, and ways you can support me with Subscribestar and GoFundMe. Thanks to the Praetorian Chads who make everything possible on my end, supporting the channel. You're very much appreciated. Until next time, we'll be back soon. And how shall I say this? I am Semiagog, and I am out.